Russia is not a great power. Russia has an economy the same size roughly as Spain. Do you think Spain is a great power that the United States should respect?
Exactly, dude. Listen. We are in the business of trying to be a world empire, and we're going broke. We're $36 trillion in debt because we can't afford to do it. We've blown $8 trillion in the last 20 years.
Then why guy who smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls going to speak up? I don't know.
They make better arguments than you do,
General
bro.
Ben Hodges,
it's not my fault that you have a lower IQ than a stripper and an OnlyFans girl.
You're an expert.
In this one, we're going to have a look at a debate between Andrew Wilson and Dave Smith. Well, mostly Andrew Wilson going toe-to-toe with a NeoCon general, Ben Hodges, and also a veteran Democrat YouTuber named Jake Bro. In a typical Andrew Wilson fashion, he schooled the entire panel. So let's have a look at this heated debate between Andrew Wilson and Dave Smith going toe-to-toe with a neocon general and a woke Democrat who are both pro-war and think that America's involvement is necessary.
I think that for Andrew, I would just offer, as I'm pretty sure you know this, the amount of money, the 120 to 180 billion, depending on what you include in that amount. It's clearly not 350, but the amount of money that the United States has spent or contributed towards helping Ukraine, the overwhelming majority of that money was spent in the United States. It's not pallets of ammunition, of money that are loaded onto a C-17 and then delivered into Ukraine. It's money that is spent replacing or buying ammunition, refurbishing old equipment that is then loaned or given to Ukraine. And of course, there are no U.S. troops in Ukraine except for those officers that are assigned to the embassy and the Office of Defense Cooperation, whose task is to make sure accountability of every javelin, every artillery round, every set of binoculars. Oh, you can shake your head if you want to. That's a fact. So
why don't you stop pretending that we don't have United States Special Forces on the ground right this second? We don't have CIA agents all over Ukraine right this second. Why don't you just stop pretending? Because it's nonsense. Okay. And we all know it's nonsense. This is the way, hang on, this is the way it's been going for a long time. And when you talk about, well, Andrew, what we're actually doing is we're spending a whole bunch of money on refurbishing equipment here instead of buying new equipment to send over there. So what? So why are you still spending tons of my money on something I don't care about to send over to a nation which is corrupt as hell? So can we just stop BSing each other for a second? Yes, the United States has boots on the ground there. Yes, we have special forces units there. We have CIA agents there, and we would be fools to pretend we don't.
It's an interesting argumentative style that you had, and you know, I always, when people start calling me names or whatever, then I really the credibility.
I didn't call you any names, sir. I didn't call you any names.
Whatever. Okay.
What was the name that I called you?
I think the key is this idea of trying to end the war.
Actually, just offended by tone. You just don't like tone. You know, maybe a little tone policing getting worked in there. Maybe that Southern drawl where you try to make yourself sound likable because you have it doesn't work so well on me because you can't gaslight me with this stuff. It's nonsense. Yes, there's boots on the ground there. Yes, there's been boots on the ground there probably since the beginning. Yes, we're spending $100 billion plus on equipment that we then either send over there. And by the way, there's hidden money going over there too. This is such nonsense. Just stop gaslighting the American people. Stop it. We're not stupid. We've seen this on repeat so many times now. So many times.
General,
so
respond.
The idea of ending the war, of course, is exactly what we would like to do, but it needs to be an end that is sustainable. And I think President Zelensky understands that he can't just sign or accept an end to the war where Russia will wait for us to lose interest, because we always do lose interest, and then they pick right back up with a resumption of the conflict after we have left or turned our back. And so I think it's reasonable to expect the Ukrainians to want some sort of guarantee, whether that's continued aid, continued equipment, or presence. They haven't. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Obviously, I would prefer to see Ukraine in NATO. We get better the day they join NATO. It's not going to happen anytime soon, especially if the United States is not willing to do it, and the Biden administration also is not willing to do it. But how do we end it when you're the partner on the other side, negotiating partner on the other side of the table is Vladimir Putin? I mean, there's no reason to have confidence that they will live up to any agreement because there's nothing in their history. And I do appreciate that Andrew likes my North Florida accent.
Well, let me bring in Dave. I want to bring in Dave. We've got.
Yeah, I never quite understand this argument that seems to just logically fall apart, that we can't end a war because the war might pick up at some point in the future, and therefore, if we don't have a perfect guarantee that, I mean, even if it, I mean, I don't know. I've heard the entire time through this war, including on your show, Piers, that if Putin was successful in Ukraine, then he was going to move on Poland, right? Like, this is what Joe Biden kept saying. This was the official, like, you know, fear mongering of this war. And so if you're telling me that even NATO membership isn't a guarantee, then yes, we never have a perfect guarantee. By the way, you also don't have a guarantee from any government in the history of the world. That doesn't mean that ending a war isn't still a positive. And I just want to go back to what was, brought up initially. The idea that this was a case of failed deterrence, and that if only we had deterred Vladimir Putin sooner, then we could have avoided this whole thing. I mean, let's just kind of quickly overlook the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy in Europe. We've expanded NATO all the way to Vladimir Putin's borders. We constantly floated out the idea for years that we would include Ukraine at some point, give them full membership. We said point blank in 2008 at the Bucharest summit that we were bringing Georgia and Ukraine into NATO before Russia ended up going to war with Georgia there. And then we look, Piers, like we've done this before on the show too, right? But just imagine, if you can, have a little bit of strategic empathy and put yourself in the Russian shoes. If Russia, let's say the Soviet Union had never collapsed, and the Soviet Union had poured $100 million into a Mexican street protest that overthrew a democratically elected government, and they had been saying for years they were going to bring Mexico into their military alliance, and then when the new government came up, they recognized them immediately and started arming them, as Donald Trump foolishly bragged about the other day with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Piers, do you think Americans would feel that was deterrence, or do you think we might view that as a provocation? I mean, like, it's just,
stop
by
using
the way,
logic,
when
Dave.
Donald
Stop
Trump,
using logic, Dave.
Well, look, when
let me
Donald
ask,
Trump
rather than me try and
quickly,
answer a very logical question, let me get Jake to respond to that.
So the first thing that he said, what is the concern if Russia takes Ukraine? If Russia can't even go 60 kilometers deep and take the city of Pokrovsk, what is the threat to NATO? And it's, yes, absorbing a country of 40 million people, absorbing a country that has $10 trillion of natural resources under the ground. It's the strategic location on the Black Sea. If Russia absorbs Ukraine, they will Russify the people. They will annihilate the Ukrainian identity, turn them into Russians, and then start press ganging them into the military and send them into meat wave attacks against the Baltics, against Poland and the Suwalki Gap. We're trying to prevent Russia from getting stronger. And I don't care about what Russia thinks or feels. Russia is not a great power. Russia has an economy the same size roughly as Spain. Do you think Spain is a great power that the United States should respect?
Exactly, dude. Listen, we are in the business of trying to be a world empire, and we're going broke. We're $36 trillion in debt because we can't afford to do it. We've blown $8 trillion in the last 20 years on foreign wars.
Why is Donald Trump talking about invading Greenland? Why is Donald Trump talking about invading Panama?
I don't agree with that.
Why is Donald Trump talking about annexing Canada? Why is he talking about ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip?
Conversation.
That is empire.
See, you lost
total red herring.
Is the one
Stay on
pushing
topic,
for America to be a global empire.
That's a total red herring. Total red herring.
Total red herring. And by the way, I don't support.
Is the guy who smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls going to speak up? I don't know.
They make better arguments than you do,
General
bro.
Ben Hodges,
it's not my fault that you have a low IQ than a stripper and an OnlyFans girl.
You're an expert. These other guys, I can't take them serious.
Okay, well, I mean, listen, you just couldn't respond to my point.
You need to have the right pedigree in order to make an argument, bro.
Say that you can't take me seriously, but you just completely didn't. You had no response to the argument. Listen, the current estimate I've seen is that Russia's GDP is about $2 trillion a year. Try to keep perspective on this. That is less than a third.
Is Spain a great power that we should respect? Is Italy a great power that we should respect?
Well, aren't we all missing? Okay, let me bring the elephant in the room into the debate. nobody's mentioning the nuclear arsenal that Russia has. That's what makes it different to any of these other countries. Russia on its own has more nukes than any other country, including the United States. That is a fact. There are, I think, 9 countries in the world that have nukes. The UK has some, France has some. There are American nukes at a number of other European countries. But let's be clear, when it comes to deterrent, there's probably only one deterrent that Putin really cares about, and that is a nation that is nuclear armed. And when I interview, and I'll bring the general in here for this, when I interviewed President Zelensky 2 weeks ago, he did say, as part of the security that he wanted, maybe we could have our nuclear weapons back, because of course, when Ukraine became an independent country, they had a lot of Russian nuclear missiles on their territory, a lot. And they agreed to give them all back to Russia, but only because Russia, America, and the UK gave undertakings that they would be guaranteed defense. And that hasn't materialized. And so you could argue, if you go right back to the start of all this, from when Ukraine went out on its own, had they been allowed to keep some of those nuclear missiles that were Russian-owned but were on Ukraine territory, had they been able to keep them and remain a nuclear power, that might have been the only thing that would have deterred Vladimir Putin. Now, what would you say to that?
Well, of course, you have to take Russia's nuclear capabilities seriously. They have a lot of them. They don't care how many innocent people might be killed. But I think that it was a mistake of the Biden administration to assume that if Ukraine was successful or we did too much, that Russia might retaliate with a nuclear weapon of some sort. And I think there was never a chance they were going to do that, because there was no benefit to the Russians to use.
But would Russia have invaded Ukraine if Ukraine had retained some of the nuclear weapons they had to give up back in the mid-90s?
Well, that's a fair question to ask, but I don't know. I mean, having a nuclear force is incredibly expensive. Almost half of UK's defense budget is tied up just in their nuclear force. So could Ukraine have managed to continue a nuclear deterrent that was modernized, ready, prepared, when in fact, it's not just about having those big silver bullets. It's also the whole system to be able to deliver it. And I'm not sure that that's I can't answer that with any sort of assurance. But nuclear deterrence, this has always been one of the most important contributions of the United States to NATO, was the nuclear capability that we brought, as well as what UK and France possess as well. So we do live in a nuclear world. I think it was unfortunate that we allowed ourselves to be deterred by Russian threats of nuclear weapons, because now everybody else that wants a nuke or has one or is trying to get one sees that we could be deterred by just the threat of the use
I
of
totally agree. I was saying that actually throughout the entire time. Every time Putin was in a bit of a hot situation, he'd just rattle his nuclear saber in a threatening and aggressive manner, rather than the deterrent, defensive manner that you're supposed to do with your nuclear deterrent. And everyone backed off, terrified. That's not how a nuclear deterrent is supposed to work. You're supposed to, if you've got as many as he's got, which the Americans and the UK and France collectively would have, rattle them back. That's the point. Anyway, I've got to leave it there. Thank you. Fascinating debate. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Why would Vladimir Putin nuke the very same ground that he's trying to take? He wants to use that territory, not turn it into a nuclear wasteland that he can't use for the next 50 or 100 years or whatever it is. And going back a little bit, to counter the woke Democrats' point about Trump wanting to invade Greenland and Canada, no. We would never invade Greenland or Canada. If they wanted to join the United States as a state or whatever, it would be through diplomacy. So that comparison is completely off base and has no merit to this conversation. And furthermore, to counter his point about Russia's population would grow if he takes Ukraine, well, the parts of Ukraine that Putin has right now, most of the people that live there already speak Russian. So it's kind of weird that this person in the United States is so concerned about a part of Ukraine who not that long ago was a part of the Soviet Union, would now be a part of Russia, which I was speaking to somebody from that area just this last week, It's only one man's opinion. But what he told me was that the people that live there don't care. They literally just want the war to stop. They don't care if they're in Russian territory or Ukrainian territory. They just want their neighborhoods, their homes, and their families to stop dying and for the war to end. It's as simple as that. So when you talk about the people with the most interest involved, they want it to stop. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish at this point. And it's just so ironic that it's the left and the neocons that are out here saying that we need to continue this war because, you know, if Putin takes this, then he's going to move on to the next step in the next country, which, you know, right now he's messing with a non-NATO nation. And if he were to take that next step, he would be messing with the NATO nation, and that would demand a response from NATO, which includes the United States, or at least for now, because right now, I don't know what's in it for the Americans, what's in it for you and me as American citizens to continue to provide all this money and funding and strength to NATO when they're not very adequate and they're not really willing to pay their fair portion as it goes already. So if they want to protect their borders against Russia, maybe they need to step it up. Maybe they need to train their soldiers better, and maybe they need to be less reliant on the United States to take care of everything and fix all of their problems and protect them for them. And as a matter of fact, to me personally, I'm beginning to wonder if an alliance with Russia would be more beneficial to Americans in their everyday lives than continuing the shit show of an alliance with NATO that we currently have. Not only would an alliance with Russia break up the whole BRICS thing, which is a huge threat to the United States and NATO down the road, it could also potentially provide us a strong ally, one way stronger than NATO, in my opinion, that is just across the Bering Sea from us. I mean, literally, Russia is just right there. It's not that far from Alaska. It's not that far from the United States. It almost seems to me like there's a lot of potential in that. I don't know. I don't like Putin. I think he has done some bad things, but I also understand the reason why he did make this move, because to me, it's pretty easy to understand from the United States perspective, at least, that if one of our enemies was setting up bases in Mexico or Canada, or maybe one of the islands around, you know, off of a coast somewhere, the United States government and its people would most certainly demand some sort of action. So let me know your thoughts on that, because I'm genuinely curious what's in it for the United States if they were to ditch NATO and potentially partner with Russia. I don't know. It's worth thinking about. It's worth considering, especially if we're really honestly trying to do everything possible to make Americans' lives greater and safer within our own country. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.